I would say the thing that has come out since his death that, for me at least, has been the most cathartic and important thing that I have read is the Ta-Nehisi Coates piece that came out yesterday in Vanity Fair. I assume many of us are familiar with Ta-Nehisi Coates, a incredible author. I think his most famous book is probably Between the World and Me. And the thing that's really cool about Ta-Nehisi Coates is that he is a public intellectual that embodies a curious and open spirit in as much as he has changed his mind. Ta-Nehisi Coates over the year has developed his thinking in new ways and different ways. On his most recent book, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, had a really stunning essay on his experience of traveling to Palestine. If you've seen this before, we'll talk about it. If you've not read this article, I do recommend it. It's one of those ones where, hypothetically, if you don't subscribe to Vanity Fair, you have to find another way to read it, but you're all smart, so you can do it. You're smart people. Let's make this bigger, and I'll check to see if it looks okay on the screen because I want everyone to have a nice time and see the thing together. Before he was killed last week, Charlie Kirk left a helpful compendium of words, one that would greatly aid those who sought to understand his legacy and import. It's somewhat difficult to match these words with the manner in which Kirk is presently being mentioned in mainstream discourse. New York Times columnist Ezra Klein dubbed Kirk one of the era's most effective practitioners of persuasion, and a man who is practicing politics in exactly the right way. This is the problem, right? When someone like an Ezra Klein, who I've talked about before in the context of abundance stuff, looks at Charlie Kirk's style of showing up on college campuses and yelling at 19-year-olds and saying, like, this is politics in exactly the right way, I fundamentally disagree. There's a lot of other examples I'll give you. But I'll give you one example real quick. Look at what friend of the program, Kat Bugazale, is doing with her congressional campaign in Illinois. She put out a video today asking for some funds. If you have money to give her, I'd consider doing it. But Kat is using the money that she's raising for her campaign to do projects that serve the community in which she is running. She's directly benefiting people. For me as a person, this is one man named Michael Burns' opinion. I think that a better way to do politics than the Charlie Kirk model is a model in which your political actions aim at directly serving the material needs of communities. That's just my opinion. What do I know? I'm just some dummy. Gavin Newsom hailed his passion and commitment to debate. He asked us to engage with each other across ideology. Atlantic writer Sally Jenkins said he argued with civility and said his death was a significant loss for those who believe engagements can help bridge disagreements. I would love to see an example of him engaging in such a way that it bridged disagreements. If there is one, I mean this very genuinely. I would love to see it. The mentions of debate and engagement are references to Kirk's campus tours during which he visited various colleges to take on whoever may come. That this aspect of Kirk's work would be so attractive to writers and politicians is understandable. There is, after all, a pervasive worry among the political class that college students ensconced in their own bubbles could use a bit of shock therapy from a man unconcerned with preferred pronouns, trigger warnings, and the humanity of Palestinians. If you are a writer, Ta-Nehisi Coates is great. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a good writer. The way that he hits that last sentence right there, wow. That's all I got to say. But it also shows how the political class's obsession with universities blinds it to everything else. And the everything else of Kirk's politics amounted to little more than a loathing of those whose mere existence provoked his ire. It's not just, for instance, that Kirk held disagreeable views. He was pro-life. He believed in public executions and rejected separation of church and state. Claims of his civility, this is Coates, are tough to square with his penchant for demeaning members of the LGBTQ plus community as freaks and referring to trans people with the slur, I don't even want to say that word, TRANNY. I highlight it. It feels gross to say. And he said that at people, and he said it at trans people. Faced with the prospect of a Kamala Harris presidency, he told his audience that the threat had to be avenged because she would kidnap your child via the trans agenda. That's a thing. Remember when Kamala Harris was running and she said, if you vote for me, I will kidnap your child with the trans agenda. You know who's actually kidnapped children? The other guy. The other guy has kidnapped some kids via ICE agents who are Pussies. If I spelled that right. He was a master of folding seemingly discordant bigotries into each other, as when he defined the American way of life as marriage, home ownership, and child rearing, free of the lesbian, gay, transgender garbage in their school. Cool. Awesome. Adding that he did not want kids to have to hear the Muslim call to prayer 5 times a day. Oh, you hate Muslim people? We've gathered that. The American way of life was Christendom, he claimed. And Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. Another thing that Kirk and people on his team, because all this boring team stuff we're really into, is this idea that there is some cabal of so it's the Marxist leftist using Islam funded by the Jews. If I'm getting this right, if I'm putting all the threads together right, all the Marxist materialist using the sword of Islam with money from the Jews. It sounds great. Super cool. Let's see. Someone get mad at me. Matthew Roder in the chat said civility, aka hypernormalization. Yes, I can't believe I've avoided talking about Adam Curtis thus far. And there is a thing we will end on today's program that I think is a very, I guess I would say a very like Adam Curtis-y moment, a very Adam Curtis-y point to end things on. So we'll get there when we get there, but we're not going to get there right now. Okay, back to the Coates article. He asserted that New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani was a Mohammedan, and he said he wants to see that anyone trying to see Mohammedism taking over the West would love to have New York a prior Anglo center. Bro, if you're out here saying stuff like a prior Anglo center, if you are saying words out of your mouth like an Anglo center, a place for the Anglos, like we know what you're saying. We know. He habitually rallied against black crime. Like those are his last words, claiming that prowling blacks go around and fund target white people. He repeated the rape accusations against Yusef Salaam, a member of the exonerated Central Park Five, who is now a New York City councilman, calling him a disgusting pig who gotten away with gang rape. Let's just be clear. If you don't know the history here, 5 black teenagers in New York were convicted of a crime that all evidence has proved they did not do. It was a traumatic experience for all of them. One of those people is a New York City councilman, and this is what he's having here. This is what's going on right here. Snicker Snack has brought up, would you consider playing Kamala Tale? It's like the election mixed with Undertale. Play it when you need a good laugh. I'll look into it. I've never heard of that before, but I will look it up. But again, this is just the sort of person we're talking about. And listen to his comments on Haiti. It was a country infested with demonic voodoo whose migrants were raping your women and hunting you down at night. Language where black people are framed as like raping women, so you gotta like lynch them and stuff. This is a thing. We've had this in America. This isn't a new thing. We've had this thing in America. We've had this thing. This has been a thing. These Haitians are having a field day, per Kirk. They're coming for your daughter. The only hope was Donald Trump, who had to prevail, lest Haitians become your masters. Yeah, because that was happening. We all remember the time where all the Haitian gangs in America were coming for our daughters and our women with their voodoo power. Not that Haiti is an island that's been colonized and exploited by Europe in ways that many other places haven't. Not that the devastation of that place is tied to slavery and colonization in real ways. Not that country still owes a debt to France. A debt for what? Oh, for slaves that self-emancipated. Cool, 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 cool. Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. Yeah, this is great stuff. Great stuff. You know, he was all about the anti-white agenda. He called the southern border the dumping ground of the planet. It was a magnet for rapists, thugs, murderers, fighting age males. Fighting age males. I'm gonna say he talks like Charlie Kirk talked like someone who was like a slave master or like a someone who would like be at the auctions or something like that. They're coming from across the world, from China, from Russia, from Middle Eastern countries. They're coming in and they're coming and they're coming. Oh, and then Jewish donors. Yeah, the Jewish donors did it too. The Jewish donors did it. It's so boring how it always comes back to that for these. It always comes back to the Jews. Not great. His bigotry was not personal, but extended to the institution he founded, Turning Point USA. So Turning Point USA, an organization worth a lot of money. It's a big media company that has money. It has money and employees. Crystal Clanton, the group's former national field director, once texted, "I hate black people. Like, fuck them all. I hate blacks." End of story. First of all, blacks? This is what that's what we're saying? One of the group's advisors, Rip McIntosh, once published a newsletter featuring an essay from a pseudonymous writer that said blacks have become socially incompatible with other races. Oh, cool. In 2022, after 3 black football players were killed in another college, Meg Miller, president of Turning Point's chapter at the University of Missouri, joked in a social media message, if they would have killed 4 more N-words, we would have had the whole week off. Cool organization. This is politics done right. This is how we got to do politics in America. You know, Turning Point is an example of young people just doing the right thing. Just doing the right thing. Oh no, they're just little Nazis. He subscribed to some of the most disreputable and harmful beliefs the country's ever known. But Coates notes it was still chilling to think that those beliefs would be silenced by a gunshot. The tragedy is personal. The tragedy is national. Political violence ends conversation and invites war. Its rejection is paramount to a functioning democracy and a free society. It's true. It's not great. Political violence, not great. The thing with political violence, so many people have said this week, so I'm sorry to be repetitive here, is like a lot of stuff is political violence. Like poverty is a form of political violence. You guys hear about, like ICE raids and the militarization of American cities, the militarization of police. That's all political violence. America's complicity with an ongoing genocide that's killing kids and leaving, innocent children as amputees. That is all political violence. America has a pretty high body count, guys. America is a very violent place. There's violence that is baked into the sort of blood of this nation. I've been thinking a lot about Paul Thomas Anderson this week as I get ready for his new movie. But think about the movie There Will Be Blood. If you guys haven't seen that movie, please watch that movie. When the character Daniel Plainview, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, says something like, there's a competition in me. Like, he embodies something about the spirit of America, which is fundamentally violent, which is fundamentally accumulationist, which is fundamentally individualist. And Paul Thomas Anderson got that, so made a movie about how that is the case. In 2022, when Kirk was frustrated by the presence of Leah Thomas on the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team, he said, so he didn't call for spirited discourse. He said that fathers should descend from the stands, forming a line in front of Leah Thomas and saying, "Hey, tough guy, you want to get in the pool? Because you're going to have to come through us." A thing I'll say now, and I feel like I've been pretty composed. No, I'm going to drink your milkshake. I'm going to drink it up. Drink it up. I'm going to lose composure for a second here. This is very much, and I use this quote a lot, but Jay-Z has a line, I think it's in 99 Problems, where he says, the type loud as a motorbike, but wouldn't bust a grape in a food fight. The point of that lyric being, there are people that say things and like to posture as if they are a violent and aggressive person who, in an instance of real life violence, would pee their pants. And Charlie Kirk and many of the prominent right-wing figures are that person. This is someone who, after Paul Pelosi was like beat half to death with a hammer, said that we should praise that guy as a hero. or whatever. So when he says a bunch of dads should go fight a trans college woman, I mean, A, Jesus Christ, but B, and I say this as someone who most of my job is just sitting in chairs, talking and writing and reading. Like he was a guy that just sat around and talked all day. He wasn't tough, wasn't like a tough guy. It's not like he was like a MMA fighter turned media correspondent. You know, it's just, yeah. I'll stop because I'll cross a line soon. Weeks before his death, he said, "We're taking our country back from these cockroaches." Hey, you guys ever seen Hotel Rwanda? Yeah, calling people cockroaches, pretty big connection between that and political violence. Also, English people are being totally normal about this, as this article shows. Picture Tommy Robinson, who's like an English Nazi. The English are using this to be weird as hell. And Coates says a lot in this that I think is really important. So says, what are we to make of a man who called for the execution of the American president and then was executed himself? What are we to make of an NFL that on one hand encourages us to end racism and on the other urges us to commemorate an unreconstructed white supremacist? And what are the writers, the thinkers, and the pundits who cannot separate the great crime of Kirk's death from the malignancy of his public life? Can they truly be so ignorant to the words of a man they've so rushed to memorialize? I don't know, but the most telling detail in Klein's column was that for all his praise, there was not a single word in the piece from Kirk himself. Again, I think a lot of people in like the liberal discourse, I think a lot of people who are probably well-intentioned turned on the news and they didn't know who this guy was. And they heard that some guy who was like a news host on the right got killed. And then they saw that some people on the left were saying mean stuff. And they were like, oh, that's horrible. Because in the reporting on his passing, they used a bunch of superlatives to talk about him. What they didn't use is his own words. You know? They didn't show a lot of clips. Didn't show a lot of quotes after he died. And I think it's worth noting, as Ta-Nehisi Coates points out in this piece, that in the Ezra Klein New York Times feature talking about how he was good, he didn't quote him. He didn't give an example of him doing this stuff. Also, guys, I know in the chat people are trying to get to 666 on the likes, so maybe just do it. It's a nice thing to do. Why not? Why not? More than a century ago, this country ignored the explicit words of men who sought to raise an empire of slavery. It subsequently transformed those men into gallant knights who sought only to preserve their beloved Camelot. Coates here is talking about the fact that the United States of America is a country founded in racial violence, and many of the very people who were a part of constructing that racial violence in a nation based around that racial violence and dehumanization are people that we put on monuments and statues, and we say that they're so good, they're so good, they're so great. Also, by the way, we got to take any mention of slavery down from the parks. Do you guys hear about this one? I think a couple days ago, Trump, it's a thing. I think in Georgia, there's some parks where the national parks they have to take down anything that acknowledges the existence of slavery or things of that nature happening in those places because it's a bad vibe and they don't like it. There was a fatigue in certain quarters with Reconstruction and a desire for reunion to make America great again. Coates goes on to say, words, and this is the end of the piece, words are not violence, nor are they powerless. Burying the truth of the Confederacy, rewriting its aims and ideas, and ignoring its animating words allowed for the terrorization of the black population, the imposition of apartheid, and the destruction of democracy. The rewriting and the ignoring were done not just by Confederates, but also by putative allies for whom the reduction of black people to serfdom was an unfortunate price of white unity. The import of his history has never been clearer than in this moment, when the hard question must be asked: if you would look away from the words of Charlie Kirk, from what else would you look away? I think that leaves us with something important here, guys, because if we're actually trying to build a world that isn't fertile soil for white supremacy, if we're trying to build a world that doesn't have really good conditions for white nationalism, for racism, for hatred against marginalized groups, if we're trying to build a world that has a sense of equality to it, you know,